and understanding them, it was as if I could see in my mind everything he was telling me. I was seeing it all happen in front of my eyes. He wasn't just telling me, he was taking me round the world, round his world, and showing me. He showed me the bottom of the sea, where a coral leaf lay dying and littered with rubbish. I saw a whale being winched, bleeding out of the sea, a turtle caught up in a vast fishing net, along with sharks and dolphins. There was an albatross, too, hanging there, limp and lifeless. I saw the ice cliffs in the Arctic falling away to the sea, and a polar bear roaming the ice, thin and hungry. He showed me skies so full of smoke that day had become night, and below them were forests burning. An orangutan was running for her life along a beach, clutching her infant, the hunters coming after her. And then he showed me people, thousands upon thousands of them, in a tented city by the sea, and a child lying hungry. Grandfather said, all this has to stop. You are killing the sea we live in. You are killing the air we breathe. You are killing the world. Tell a child, Grandfather said. Only the children will put it right. That's why I came. Will you put it right? But how can I cried. Tell them why I came. Tell them what I said. Tell them they have to change the way they live, and don't just tell them, show them. Will you do that? Yes, I cried. I promise. But do you keep your promises? He asked. I'll keep this one, I told him. That's all I needed to hear, he said. Time for me to go now. I don't want to get myself beached, do I? I like your town, I like your river, but I'm much more at home back in my sea. But what if you get beached too? I asked. What if you die? I'd rather not, of course, he said. But like I told you, I had to come. It was important. In fact, the most important thing I ever did. I promised I'd do it, didn't I? And now I've done it. The rest is up to you. And away he swam then, blowing loudly as he passed upriver under Battersea Bridge, so that the whole river echoed with the sound of it. There was a final flourish of his tail before he dived. It was like he was waving goodbye, so I waved back. I stayed there watching for a while, just in case he came up again. All around me, the birds were watching too, but that was the last we saw of them. And that's the end of my story. Mrs. Ferguson was so delighted to see Michael writing away that she'd let him go on longer than the others had finished. That's why she let him stay in all through break time too. She stayed in the classroom with him because she had some marking to do anyway. Every time she looked up, Michael was still beavering away at his story. She'd never seen him so intent on anything, and certainly not in his writing. Until now, he'd always seemed to find writing rather difficult. She was intrigued. She was longing to ask him what he was writing about, but she didn't want to interrupt him. Michael finished just as the bell went, and everyone came rushing back into the classroom, filling the place with noise. When they'd settled down, Mrs. Ferguson thought she'd try something she hadn't tried before with this class. She asked if any of them would like to read their story out loud. It was the last thing Michael wanted. He knew they wouldn't believe him. They'd laugh at him. So he was very relieved when Elena, who always sat next to him, put her hand up. He was quite happy to sit there and listen to another of Elena's horsey stories. Elena was mad about horses. It was all she ever wrote about or talked about, all she ever painted too. Mrs. Ferguson said it was good, maybe a bit short, but that perhaps it might be nice if she wrote about something else beside horses once in a while. Michael was looking out of the window, thinking of his whale deep down in the sea with his families all around him. So it caught him completely by surprise when she suddenly turned to him and said, Michael, why don't you read us yours? What's it about? It's about a whale, miss, Michael replied. She was coming over to his table. She was picking up his book. A whale? That sounds really interesting. Goodness gracious, you've written pages and pages, Michael. You've never written this much before, have you? Would you like to read it out to us? Michael shook his head, which didn't surprise Mrs. Ferguson at all. Michael was never one of those children who liked to volunteer for anything. Your handwriting's a bit scriggly, but I can still read it. She leafed through all the pages. Yes, I'm sure I can. Shall I read it out for you? You don't mind, do you, Michael? Then she spoke to the whole class. Would you like to hear Michael's story, children? And they all did. So there was nothing Michael could do to stop her. He had to sit there and listen like everyone else. He wanted to put his hands over his ears. He didn't dare look up. He didn't want to have to see all those mocking smiles. To begin with, Mrs. Ferguson read it like she always did, in her teachery voice, as if it was just any story. Then gradually her whole tone seemed to change, and she was reading it as if she was inside the story down by the river, as if she was seeing it all, hearing it all, feeling it all, as if she was longing to know what was going to happen. Michael dared to look around him now. No one was laughing. No one was even smiling. The longer the story went on, the more Mrs. Ferguson's voice trembled, and the more silent the class became. When she had finished, she stood there for a long while, so moved she was unable to speak. But Michael was still waiting for the first sound of laughter, dreading it. Then all of a sudden, Elena started clapping beside him, and moments later they were all clapping, including Mrs. Ferguson, who was smiling at him through her tears. An amazing story, Michael. The best I've read in a long time, and certainly the best you've ever written. Quite wonderful, she said. Only one thing I would say, Michael, she went on. It doesn't really matter, of course. But if you remember, Michael, I did tell you it had to be a true story, something that had really happened. Oh, it is true, miss. It all happened, just like I said. Honest. That's when I saw Jamie Balshaw starting laughing and snorting. It spread all around the classroom until everyone was laughing out loud. It didn't stop until Mrs. Ferguson shouted at everyone to be quiet. You do understand what true means, Michael? It means not made up. If it is true, as you say, then that means right now, just down the road, there's a bottlenose whale swimming about in the river. And it means you actually met him, that he actually talked to you. Yeah, miss, he did. And I did meet him this morning, early, promise, about 5:30, 6. And he did talk to me. I heard his voice and it was real. I wasn't making it up. But he's not there anymore, miss, because he's gone back out to sea, like I said. It's true, I promise you. It's just like I wrote it. And then Jamie Balshaw started laughing again. Michael felt tears coming into his eyes. Try as he did, he couldn't hold them back, nor could he hold back the flood of words. He so wanted to make them believe him. It's true. When it was all over, I ran back home. Mum was already having her breakfast. She told me I was late and I'd better hurry or I'd be late for school. I told her why I was late. I told her about the whale, the whole thing. She said it was a good story, but that she didn't have time for stories, and would I please sit down and eat my breakfast? I said it was all true, every word of it. I crossed my heart and hoped to die, but she didn't believe me, so I gave up in the end and just ate my breakfast like she said. And when I got to school, I didn't dare tell anyone either, because I thought if Mum didn't believe me, then no one would. They'd just laugh at me or call me a liar. I thought it would be best to keep quiet about it, and that's what I would have done. But then you said we had to write about something that really happened to us. It could be funny or sad, you said, exciting or frightening, whatever we wanted, you said, but it had to be true, really true. No fantasy, no science fiction, and no horror stories. I want you to write down as it happened, you said, children. Just remember, that's what you told us. And I couldn't think of anything else to write about except my whale. So that's what I wrote about. It was very long, probably the longest story and most important story I've ever written. That's because I didn't want to leave anything out. I'm no good at them usually. I can't get started. I can't find a good ending. But this time it was like it was writing itself. All I had to do was let it flow onto the page from my head, along my arm, through my fingers. Sometimes, though, it was really hard to concentrate because I kept thinking about my whale, hoping and hoping he was out at sea by now with his family. The more I hoped, the more I believed it, and the more I believed it, the more I wanted to tell his story. That's why I stayed in over break time to get it finished. It was raining anyway, I didn't mind. When he'd finished, there was a long silence. Yeah, Jamie sneered. That's quite enough of that, Jamie, Mrs. Ferguson snapped, clapping her hands for silence. She could see how upset Michael was becoming. All right, Michael. Now, we'll say no more about it for the moment. Now, children, what I want is for you to illustrate the story you've just written, like that poem poster on the wall above the bookshelf, the tiger one over there. Do you remember I read it last week? Tiger, tiger, burning bright. I told you, didn't I? The poet illustrated himself, and that's what I want you to do now. Through blinding tears, Michael drew his bottlenose whale and the birds all around, the heron and the ducks and the cormorants, and then the snowy white egret watching from the boy. Then he drew himself crouching down by the river's edge with the sun coming up over London, all just as he'd seen it that morning. He'd almost finished when, very surreptitiously, and making sure Mrs. Ferguson wasn't looking, Elena slipped him a folded piece of paper. Michael opened it and read it. Liar, liar, pants on fire. Elena was shaking her head and pointing at Jamie Balshaw, who was making a face at him. That was the moment that Michael lost it. He scrunched up the paper, walked across the classroom and hurled it at Jamie's face. I'm not a liar, he said. I'm not. And boys and girls, I'll read the next bit of the story later. Bye for now.